Today, oh, mic's on. I'll start again. Hi, everyone. I'm here today to tell all of you to stop using JavaScript. So I'm fully anticipating that this entire room is full with people now angry at me. But that's okay, it's gonna be fun. So who is this JavaScript hating guy right in front of you? I'm Kilian. I've been developing websites for a very long time, but we can skip over how long that is. I'm part of the Electron governance team, and if you don't know what Electron is a framework that lets you make desktop applications using web technologies. It essentially glues Node and Chromium together. And I use that to build a browser for developers called Polypane. It looks like this, and that's roughly all I'll say about it in this talk. If this sounds interesting, though, come talk to me afterwards. I have stickers. But to answer the question, do I hate JavaScript? Well, all of this is JavaScript. So I write JavaScript all day, every day, and honestly, I write way too much of it. But I do write it every day. So you could actually say that I love JavaScript, but I also really love CSS, and I even love HTML. Hold on. There we go. Now, the reason I love all three of these technologies is something called the rule of least power. Now, the rule of least power is a core web principle, and it means that you should choose the least powerful language suitable for a given purpose. Now, on the web, this means preferring HTML over CSS and CSS over JavaScript, because your JavaScript can break, it can fail to load, it can exclude people if you don't think about things like keyword interactions. It takes extra resources to download and to parse and to run. And that is the case, or that is because JavaScript is an imperative language. You tell the browser what to do, or how to do the things you want it to do. CSS and HTML, on the other hand, are declarative languages. And what that means is that you give the browser instructions, you tell them what you want to happen, and the browser takes that and goes and figures it out for you. So the browser does the heavy lifting for you. And that means that the browser can choose the most optimal way to implement certain features. Now, of course, I know your JavaScript can also fail to load, but I know that each and every one of you in this room right now write perfect semantic HTML, and that means that people can just use your website and web app, even if it has no style. The HTML really is the foundation. And I know you might be thinking, yeah, but there's only so much it can do. But the good news is that browser makers are listening very closely to us. They are porting a lot of functionality that in previous years needed JavaScript to HTML and to CSS, coming up with new ways to build declarative interactions instead of having you rebuild the same thing over and over again in JavaScript. So that's what we'll be going over today. But what I want you to take away from this talk isn't any specific technique, but this concept that once you learn something, you'll never have to learn it again, because that is the contract we have with the web. Once you learn how to implement something on the web in JavaScript, that becomes part of your toolbox, and it will keep working, because the web is backwards compatible. So that Lightbox library you chose a decade ago still works, still behaves exactly the same. It works on the site you built a decade ago. It works on the site you're building today. But that doesn't mean that there's now no better way to do the same thing. But you don't have an incentive to learn that new thing, because the old things still work. So the techniques that I'll be showing you today are cool, and that's why I'm showing them. But what I really want you to take home from this talk is that next time you sit down at your laptop, at your desktop, to implement a new feature, and you reach for that JavaScript library that you know and are familiar with. You take a step back, you ask ChatGPT, it'll give you the wrong answer. You'll Google for it, and you'll figure out whether or not there's not now a native browser implementation that you can use instead. And that will make your website a tiny bit better. So let's get started. I am going to show you a bunch of different demos. Some of them are things that have been available for a very long time. Some are things that aren't available yet. There are live demos, so some of them might break. You can help me out by laughing when that happens. So let's get started. And we'll start with this thing, custom switch. We used to be happy with checkboxes. But then Apple, and now we have to all build this thing instead. Now we often reach for a JavaScript solution. We add a bunch of divs to the page and we style them. We handle the click events, we handle the on and the off state. But instead, let's build one with an ordinary checkbox and the checked pseudo target, pseudo class. And that means we can have fully interactive toggles that behave exactly how the UX designer wants them to behave, but we're building them using native browser APIs. And that means that everything that the browser does for you is automatically implemented. So this is the HTML that we're going to be using. As you can see, it's pretty simple. There's a label. The label has a readable text so that it's accessible. And there is a checkbox. Now the neat thing here is that just by using this HTML, we already have functionality that JavaScript implementations wouldn't have. Because the browser knows that if an input is inside a label, these two are now associated. And what the browser will do is let you click anywhere on the label. So there's no click handlers involved. There's no magic. There's nothing up my sleeve. But the browser knows that this label belongs to this checkbox. And I can click anywhere in my label and toggle the checkbox. So that's pretty neat. It's just something the browser gives you for free. But of course, this isn't pretty enough. We need that custom switch. So we'll add a couple of lines of CSS. Now, it's not super important what these lines of CSS are, because it's stuff you know. It's like making a round border, adding some padding, picking a background color. Except for this line right here, appearance none. Appearance none you might not have encountered before. Form elements, like images, are something called replaced content. And that means that when the browser renders your page, it leaves a little box open on your page. It's not a color, it's just not there in your HTML. And the browser then comes in, takes that box, and replaces it with a form element. And it used to be, way back, that form element wasn't actually drawn by the browser, but it was a form element directly from the operating system. And that's why we all collectively now think that form elements are hard to style. Because they literally weren't part of the web page. Things have improved a lot. Browsers now provide form controls. They have much more styling capabilities. But with appearance none, we can actually tell the browser, no, don't replace my checkbox. I'm going to take care of it. Get rid of your appearance, and now it's my responsibility. And what that gives you is you can now use the before element on an input. Before and after pseudo elements you can create with CSS, but they are inside of the element. And that works well for elements on your page, but if the element gets replaced, then the pseudo elements inside of it also get replaced. So that's why you couldn't use before and after elements on form controls, because they get disappeared by the browser. But now we have a back, and that means that we can use the input for the background And then we can use the before element for the little circle, the thumb. And because this is all still HTML, it also works. So I can click it, and now it's checked. Honestly, it's checked. But maybe we need to show that to the user too. So let's do that. Using the checked pseudo class, we can make that change visible. So checked will match whenever the checkbox would normally show the little check mark. And we can chain that with the before to move the toggle from one side to the other. So now as I click, the checked pseudo class starts to match and the styles apply. Now there's one more thing that we need to add, and that is we need to think about keyboard users. Because if you use a mouse, it's pretty clear which element you're interacting with. It's the thing right under your mouse. But if you don't use a mouse, how do you know which element you're interacting with? For example, because this is still just a checkbox, I can toggle it with my spacebar. And you can see I've added a focus visible style. And focus visible is a CSS property that is only visible when using assistive technologies. So if I click something, it is focused, but it doesn't show a focus style until I interact with it with my keyboard. And then it gains that focus style. Now, what you can also see is that I use outline, which you might only experienced or used on the web by setting outline to none to get rid of the ugly dashed black square border around everything. But this one's pretty nice. I think it's pretty nice, please agree. You can see that, I can give it some offset so that it's slightly outside of my form elements. It follows the border radius. That's pretty neat. So it's evolved into a much nicer thing to use. So you can actually do pretty powerful stuff with it, especially considering that it's still just one single input. I didn't have to add another div to add this outline. It's just CSS and HTML. Now, one last thing that I don't have time to get into, but if you want to get rid of that ugly dashed black border for mouse users, probably you use outline none. I want you to make one change there, and that is to go from outline none to outline color transparent. The result is the same, because in the first situation, the outline isn't there because it's not there, and in the new situation, the outline isn't there because it's invisible. No change. Until a user uses forced color or high contrast mode on Windows, which is 1 in 25 people. So look around you. 1 in 25 people have this turned on. And what happens then is that the computer uses its own limited set of colors, and that will automatically add an outline to focused elements for those users that benefit from having those outlines always visible. As I said, I don't have time to get into it, but if you want to read way too much about it, I have a link. Now, just to illustrate that things really go from JavaScript to CSS, which we've done just now, to HTML. In the latest Safari, you can now just add a switch attribute to an input with type checkbox, and then the browser does everything for you, so you can forget about all that CSS that I just showed you, because the browser provides the checkbox for you. Now, why is it an attribute and not a type? Because this is backwards compatible. In browsers that don't have switches yet, it's just a checkbox. The functionality is the same. If it was a type of switch, the default for inputs with an unknown type is text, so that would then break. But now, with a switch attribute, it is backwards compatible, so that's pretty nice. And as you can see, you can style these things quite extensively. Not sure when this will make it into other browsers, but I'm hoping it gets into Interop, which is a program by all the major browsers to work on feature parity. You can go vote for that now if you want. So, on to something a little bit bigger. So when moving from one section of a page to another section of a page, usually that happens instantly. And that can be pretty jarring and disorienting because you don't know how far down you scrolled. Maybe there was some cool stuff in between that you would like to scroll back to. You have no idea. It would be much nicer to sort of scroll to that new location, so you have a sense of where you are on the page, what you missed, whether or not you want to go back. And in the past, we might have used jQuery for that. Remember jQuery? 5 people do. Excellent. So this is just a few lines of code, but of course, you're also shipping the entirety of jQuery to do this thing. So instead of this, you can just add a single HTML attribute or a CSS attribute to your HTML, scroll behavior smooth. And now magically, all your in-page navigations are animated. One line of CSS, that's pretty neat. So the great thing about this is that browsers will figure out for you all the hard work. So they will figure out how long the animation should take, how fast the scroll should be, if they have to cheat or not. So sometimes they'll slightly skip over things to make sure they can still do this at 60 FPS. And all of this happens off the main thread. So your page is still interactive while this happens, which isn't the case with your JavaScript solution, because that always runs on the main thread. So this means the animation is always snappy, it always behaves the same way, no matter whether you have an underpowered device or you're also watching 5 movies at the same time or whatever. Now, if you use JavaScript, you don't have to go without all the JavaScript APIs that do scrolling, like scroll to, scroll by, etc. They take a behavior argument, which you can set to smooth. So even if you use JavaScript, you don't have to use JavaScript. That's pretty nice. However, we do need to take accessibility into account. Because while for most people, jumping from one part of the page to another part of the page is the part that's jarring and disorienting, for people that have vestibular disorders, it's the sudden movement that's the issue. And it can actually make them nauseous. And if you make people nauseous with your website, they don't come back. And if they don't come back, they don't buy anything. And if they don't buy anything, you're going to get fired. So, add this line, prefers reduced motion, no preference, and wrap it around your scroll behavior smooth. What this does is it makes the default experience accessible. Even if your browser doesn't know what reduced motion is, and all current browsers do, don't worry, then you will provide the accessible experience. And only when a user has not said that they prefer reduced motion, so they don't mind having motion, you can add it. So, smooth. We now have native smooth scrolling for the people that want that, and we have no smooth scrolling for the people that prefer that. And we're not shipping any JavaScript, but we can do more. Because our sites all have beautiful headers like this one. And if you scroll to a certain part of the page, it will scroll that part of the page all the way to the top of your window, which is where the beautiful header is. With scroll margin, we can make sure that we leave space for that header. So if I now go to my target, it stops at that 100 pixels below my header, which is where people expect it. Now, for the other link, I haven't set that, and that means that it scrolls up to here, and it scrolls, it animates, but then people still have to do work themselves, which again makes them leave, though not as fast. But just think about how you would do this in JavaScript, and you would have to be measuring the height of the header, and then you would have to subtract that from the scrolling space, and then divide that to loop over the animation, etc. This is so much nicer. Now, lastly, as a finishing touch, what if we want to highlight the target that we're going to in some way to give it extra prominence? Of course, we could have a click handler, and then on that click handler add a class to our target element and add some animation that way. But we can also use the target pseudo class, and the target pseudo class will match the ID of the element that you're linking to. And then we can use that to play a little animation or do a little flash, though not too flashy, of course, and give it prominence that way without any JavaScript. So, smooth scroll to a specific section, highlighting it, and keeping space for any other UI that we have visible on the page. Pretty nice, I think, all without JavaScript. Let's move on to two UI elements that we often solve with JavaScript that we can also use HTML for, accordions and modals. So having an accordion on your page can help keep your content visually organized by showing the titles of sections, and then only when people want to read more, they can expand to a full section. And there's a pair of native HTML elements that provide just this UI, details and summary. So by default, all the contents inside your details element are hidden, except for the summary element. And then when you click the summary element, all the other elements are also shown. Of course, if you have a list of them, your UX designer is going to go, yeah, that's nice, but I want the first one open. And then you go, sure, I'll just add the open attribute, and now it's open. But if you are a React developer, you might look at this and think, yeah, that's nice, Kilian, but I see that prop. It's a Boolean. It's just always open now, and now it can't be closed. That's not great, but don't worry. This isn't a React prop. This is a live HTML attribute. And that means that clicking the summary element will actually update this open attribute in the DOM for you. So you don't set it once. It's a live representation of the state of your UI. It's something HTML does, and it's pretty neat. Now, of course, the other thing your designer is going to do is look at this triangle and decide that this is the worst triangle, and that there needs to be a better triangle or something else. And then you go, sure, because summary elements have the marker pseudo element, and you can do anything with the marker element. No, that's a lie. You can't do anything with the marker element because it's a specific subset of CSS that's supported. So you can't do a position absolute and place it somewhere else. That will just get ignored, but you can, for example, switch out the content. And then, for example, you can hook into that live HTML attribute and have a different icon when it's inside an open details element. Now, a gotcha here is that summaries are clickable, like links and buttons, but they don't look like a button, and they also don't get a different cursor, like a link. I don't want to get into the only links should have cursors debate right now. We can do that afterwards. But you can improve discoverability of these things by having some sort of hover style, something to make it clear to the user, like this is a thing you can interact with. For example, a pointer cursor or a background or something. Now, a recent addition to the details element is that you can make something called exclusive accordions by adding the same name attribute to multiple details. And when you do that, opening one will close all the others. I think this is a bad idea because I usually want to be able to read more than one thing side by side. For example, if I need to compare things between the two. But if you want this, then you don't need to use JavaScript. So, on to a dialog. Now for this one, I am going to cheat a little, because right now you do need a little bit of JavaScript to make it work everywhere. We're on the verge of not needing JavaScript, but for the interest of backwards compatibility, I do need a little bit of JavaScript. So the dialog element in HTML is like a better alert, or a better confirm, or a better prompt. These are all very old JavaScript APIs, and what they do is when you call an alert or a prompt, your page is locked. The main UI thread is halted until the pop-up is resolved. And that's super annoying. And it's also a native browser element, so you can't style anything. You can give it some text, and then the browser will display that. It's not great. Dialog is an HTML element, so you can just do everything with it. To create a dialog, you add a dialog element, and this is what it looks like, because by default it's hidden. In the dialog, you can add a form with the dialog method. Up until now, I think all of you have made forms with the post method. Now we have a dialog method as well, and we'll get to why that is relevant later. Now to show this dialog, we need to call the show modal function it exposes. So say I have a button, and I select my dialog with some pseudocode, and I call show modal on it. And for illustration, I have said on the thing what it is. So this is the dialog, and as you can see, it doesn't have any UI. There's no close button in the top left or the top right. It's just like a div. So it's your job to add this way to resolve the modal. That form with the method of dialog is the way to do that. So when you submit that form, for example, by clicking the button inside of it, it's hidden. Now, or it's hidden again, so that's how you would close it. When I say that this dialog is on top of everything, I mean on top of everything, even that annoying little chat widget in the lower right corner of your web page. Because dialogs aren't part of your web page anymore. They are part of something called the top layer, which is a new concept in browsers, and you can sort of think of it as another sheet of glass between the web page and the front of your screen. And dialogs get promoted to that new layer that sits between the web page and you. So anything that's part of the web page, like a chat widget button with a set index of 3 million, is still on that lower website and not on the top layer. So this is how easy it is to create a confirm dialog. Now, you can style the dialog however you want. You can add like rounded corners, drop shadows, etc. But you can also show a backdrop that overlays the rest of the page. For example, to dim it, if you really want to make your dialog stand out, or maybe you want to hide it entirely. And you can do that with the backdrop pseudo element. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse. So the backdrop automatically takes the full size of the viewport. The browser takes care of that. You don't have to position it yourself. You don't have to figure out what the difference between position, absolute, and fixed is again, because it's part of that top layer. It won't scroll away on you. It's just another layer between the dialog and your web page. You don't need to do any manual calculation. Let me get this one out of the way again. Now, there's a really new API in CSS called starting style. And it is actually cross-browser now. And this lets you animate elements as they get added to the page. So the classic problem that browsers had was, how do you animate something that doesn't exist yet? You can know where it needs to animate to, but if you don't know where it animates from because it doesn't exist yet, you can't actually make that transition. So to solve that, they have added something called the starting style add rule. And with the starting style add rule, you can say, right when you get added to the page, these are your styling properties. And now the browser has a start and an end for transitions, for animations. And that means you can actually make this fade in without using any JavaScript. Now you can also make them fade out without using any JavaScript, but that's a little bit more involved, so I'm going to skip over that because I have some other demos that I still want to show you. But if you want to look that up, check out discrete animation on MDN. Pretty nice. So all the things I mentioned up to now are available in browsers today, but I also wanted to give you a quick overview of things that are in just a few browsers or things that might be coming to browsers at some point in the future. Now, each of these could be a full presentation on its own, so I'm not going to do any of these any justice, but it's here so you are aware that these things exist and might be coming and might be useful for you in the future. So the first one is field sizing. It landed roughly a year ago in Chrome, and it's now also available in Safari. And it changes the way inputs and text areas are sized. Because by default, inputs and text areas are fixed size, and it doesn't matter whatever you type into it. With field sizing set to content, you can have inputs that follow the size of the content inside of them without doing any of the hacks that you can do. So if I now type in here, this is just a regular input. You can see because it has an ugly border inside of it that I didn't hide with outline color transparent. And it follows the size. And this also works for text areas. And in text areas, it actually works in 2 dimensions. So in the past, you had to solve this with JavaScript listeners and then duplicating content and then measuring that and then sending it back to the input. And that's all very, very annoying. With field sizing, you can just set this one attribute. Now, what you will want to do is set some minimum sizes, because if you don't have a placeholder, it will literally just go to the width of your caret. So a single line. And that's not really nice to click, so give it a minimum width and a maximum width, because it will also just grow with the content. But this way you can have like some sort of nicely expanding text fields. Now, who of you here has implemented their own select? Be honest. Okay, I'm sorry to tell you, but you all did a terrible job. I know this for a fact. Each and every one of you did a really poor job. But it's not your fault, because selects are really, really difficult to build, because they have an enormous amount of functionality built right into them. For mouse users, for keyboard users, they are not part of the page, so they can do stuff that you just can't replicate in HTML and CSS. But the default ones are pretty crappy too. You can't even put images in there, and you can hardly style them, and the pop-up is always just like slightly uglier than you want. So what are you gonna do? Like, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Enter customizable selects. By telling the browser that you want to style the select with, again, the appearance attribute, but this time you set it to base select, you can style the select however you want. You just get a set of diffs, fancy diffs, if you will, that you can style however you want. Now, I set appearance-based select both to the select and also to this weird, they call it a pseudo or a function, because it has parentheses, but it's the picker, which is the drop-down of the select. So you have a picker function, and in the picker function you pick which element you want the picker from. So you could even do this like selectively for specific selects and not for other selects. And I've said select very often now, but I'm gonna say it a few more times, unfortunately. But because now all of these are just HTML elements, you can see I've set it here, and like the rendering is slightly different. But it behaves like a normal select. I can select with space, I can use my arrow keys, etc. But each of these are extremely stylable. So the select list, the select now consists of a number of parts. So you have the picker, which I already mentioned, but you now also have access to a button, which is the button in your select that you can style. When you have a select button or a select menu, it will show the item you selected. To style that one, you have the selected content element that is now added that you can use, and that will contain the value that you picked. When you have the picker opened, you can give it like a grid layout if you want. And it's still fully keyword operable, fully interactive. It sets all the accessibility roles. But I can add SVGs into them. I can give them different colors. I can give them different fonts. I can style the checkbox itself, which is pretty neat. So this is in Chrome. It works really well there. It doesn't work in other browsers, so we'll get there. Again, hopefully this will be part of Interop. But this is going to solve a lot of issues, and it's going to let you throw away so much JavaScript that keeps track of arrow keys and which element is focused, and bleh. This is very nice to work with. Now, I've lost my mouse again. Now I have one last thing to show you, which is scroll-driven animations. Again, this works in Chrome, and what it allows you to do is link up animations to scroll positions. So previously, if you want to do any sort of animation on scroll, like a parallax effect, you would have to use JavaScript, and you would have to keep track of the scroll position and then set new styles, but then do it in a clever way so that you don't interrupt the main thread while it's scrolling, because that will lead to stutter, and that's super annoying, and you don't want all of that. Scroll-driven animations will let you say, for any element, keep track of its scroll position. So it can be the entire page, but it can also be just a random div that you can scroll anywhere on the page. And for a given scroll position, translate this to a keyframe. And that will allow you to do things like this, which is it's all just HTML and CSS. So each of these has its own position, and depending on where it is in the scroll timeline, as they call it, it will have a different animation, which is just CSS keyframes. Now it's available in Chrome. The syntax is a little complex, so I don't really have time to get into that. But if you want to learn more, there's a really good website called scroll-driven-animations.style that has a ton more demos and explanations and visualizations that you can go and check out to learn more about that. So those are things you can do in modern browsers and things you will be able to do in modern browsers that no longer need JavaScript. So instead of managing things in JavaScript, we can let the browser deal with it. And that means that it is more performant, more accessible, and above all, easier for us to maintain. Because we just have to give the rules to the browser, and the browser will do all the hard work for us. So I hope you now love CSS and HTML as much as I do. Thank you all. I have 5 seconds for questions. I can also take longer for questions. I don't mind. I'm here all day.